Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and what follows is an excerpted clip from one of my longer webinars. So what I've decided is that sometimes when people ask really interesting questions, I will pull out that particular part of a webinar and make it available to you as a short clip so that if you don't have time to watch a 1-hour webinar, you can at least watch and listen to the brief exchanges that I usually have with people who attend my webinars. So here is one such clip from a recent webinar. I hope you enjoy it. So one thing that becomes clear in Lacan is that after you've entered language, after you've entered the law of the father and the symbolic order, the retrieval of the real becomes impossible because the only way to retrieve it is through language. And that you also become privy to a different body of law, right? Think of it this way. How many of you have kids? I have a friend who lives in Texas, and of course I live in Texas too, who lives in Austin, and she took her 2 daughters to a camping trip, right? And the daughters are 4 and 5, 5 and 6, 4 and 5. So that when they come back from there, they take the girls to a restaurant, and suddenly someone comes and says, "Is this your kid?" And she goes out and she finds out that one of the girls had decided she needed to go, and she decided to sit in front of a tree and do it. Because she had been doing and the parents are horrified, right? So part of the reason we are horrified is because children are now in the symbolic order, and we expect that they would follow the law of the father, right? And if they don't do that, we feel like we are bad parents, right? And we feel like as if we are failing them. That's the distinction between the symbolic order and entering the law of the father and being prelingual, right? The stakes become suddenly higher. And so that's also an important thing to understand in Lacan. But just remember, all of this that we are studying, I mean, I have not tried to teach you, here are the 15 characteristics of new criticism, here are the 10 things to know about psychoanalysis. What I'm encouraging you to learn are the debates, right? Because as you grow in your scholarship, what I want you to develop is the capacity to extrapolate, right, from one theory to another, but also to understand, like right now we are at a stage where all of you pretty much know in one way or the other that the writer persona is not natural, that if it is not overdetermined, it is discursively produced. Now we have suddenly realized that even within that discursively constructed persona, when we start writing, there is more than our present self at play, because the self that is at the back of our mind, right, not really active, is also somewhat determining what we do. And so we suddenly become more conscious of that unconscious self. So all of it is developing you into, I think, that's my hope in any of theory classes, into people who handle these things in a more complex way. It's not a failed pursuit, but that's what I'm trying to do in this class. Okay. This argument, kind of a revised version of Freud, is used by others too. If you look at David Noble's book, Death of a Nation, as a historian, he talks about this tendency also, where the students, the graduate students of great scholars must also perform the job of slaying their masters. So, I mean, graduate studies previously was considered a project in which the young emerging graduate students, right, would challenge the masters and rewrite their work. And think of how many people that we know historically have done that. We talked about Derrida, right, reading his essay, dismantling his master's project in public, right? It used to be part of that training. We have here in our linguistic department, Professor Haj Ross, right, who was the first PhD student of Noam Chomsky, right? Studied with Roman Jakobson and people like that. And his dissertation was a refutation of generative grammar, directed by Chomsky himself, right? And he eventually goes on to become one of the 5 generative semanticists, right? So that tradition, where the master is also anxious that what's coming up is going to challenge, would keep the master, on his toes or her toes. But at the same time, this expectation from the young emerging scholars to figuratively kill their father figures, right? So that's also a very Freudian assumption. A lot of murder going on here. Yeah, Bloom also leaves women out. So good. So the 4 ways that he explains towards the end in which psychoanalysis is used, the 2 are kind of surface ways of doing it. And what he encourages is the second 2, formalistically, how does this thing play out? And then how does it impact the field, any given field? And those are some good suggestions by Eagleton. Good point. All thought in your mind, because you will encounter in your graduate studies people offering certain things as if they are indisputed, right? And total stable truths, right? Like this whole disdain for sentimental poetry, right? It was considered like a woman's thing to do. And then I was like, no, that's not what we do. Well, there are entire cultures that rely on that kind of poetry that makes meanings for them, and it can be revolutionary, it can be transformative, right? And so you'll run into scholar who will tell you is that the most change brought about by art in the world, political change, was not brought about by well-reasoned articles or satires or ironic texts, but primarily sentimental texts, because they have the capacity to appeal to the feelings of people. And most of the times, the latest research in consciousness tells you is that appeals to the feelings have a deeper impact on people than appealing to their reason. So these things they actually inform our understanding of the world and how, and our understanding of where is a professor coming from. Why does Professor Raja accept this way of writing and so doesn't? Or why does Raja laughs at this way of writing and so doesn't? Because we are coming to it from the prejudices that we have formed over our training and over our thought process. Yeah, I like the hermeneutics of suspicion too. Yeah, and it's also, as you read further, you will then realize that suspicion, that the text is hiding something from me, it can be driven by our own readerly habit of trying to make the text whole, or even more than that, the text is hiding something which is not in it, right? And seeking that outside the text. And then we are into a deeper kind of suspicion, because that tells us that the text is overdetermined by what it doesn't say, right? What it takes for granted, what it takes as the norm. I gave you that example. Did I give you the example of the romantic comedy, the cliche scenes from all romantic comedies where she's going to France and they have just broken up, and he and his friends drive him to JFK, and he buys a ticket and runs in there, and they meet at the plane and live. That text, what it absolutely excludes is that act is a privileged act. Not everyone can do that. When Masood Raja's wife came to America, it took him 6 months to get the visa, and then stand in line and all that. So depending on where you are, a story that otherwise looks just normal, when you read it out, what it's omitting, you realize, man, this is not a universal story, right? So that's also where you can go with these things, this hermeneutics of suspicion. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this brief clip. If you are interested in the longer version, the link will be in the description and you can watch the whole webinar. Thank you so much for your support, and as always, if you have any questions, any concerns, you can always post them in the comments and I'll be happy to respond to them. If you have a moment and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so now so that you get timely notifications of whatever is happening on this channel. Thank you for your support. Stay safe, and as always, from me to you, peace and love.